Have you ever wondered why every major decision in your life seems to revolve around debt? The house you dream of owning requires a 30-year mortgage. The car in your driveway came with a 5-year loan. Your education, which was supposed to guarantee prosperity, left you with student debt that follows you like a shadow. Even your daily coffee might go on a credit card that charges you 18% annual interest. You're not alone in feeling that debt has become the invisible architecture of modern life. The water we swim in without ever questioning why the ocean exists. But here's what might surprise you. This isn't a modern phenomenon. The story of how debt became the world's most profitable product doesn't begin with Wall Street or Silicon Valley. It begins in medieval Florence, in the counting houses of men who discovered they could create wealth from nothing more than a promise. Picture Florence in the year 1397. Giovanni di Bicci di Medici sits in his modest office above the Piazza della Signoria, studying a ledger by candlelight. He's not a nobleman, not a warrior, not even particularly wealthy by the standards of his time. But Giovanni understands something revolutionary. Money itself is just information, and information can be multiplied infinitely. While others see gold coins as wealth, he sees them as merely the physical manifestation of something far more powerful: trust, converted into numbers on a page. This realization would make his family name synonymous with banking for the next 3 centuries and establish the template for every financial empire that followed. The Medici didn't invent lending money at interest. That practice is as old as civilization itself. What they invented was far more audacious. The industrialization of debt. They transformed it from a personal arrangement between individuals into a systematic, scalable product. When a merchant needed capital to finance a voyage to Constantinople, the Medici didn't just lend him gold coins. They created a bill of exchange, a piece of paper that could be traded, sold, or used as collateral for other loans. Suddenly, one loan could become the foundation for 10 others. This was the birth of what we now call leverage, though the Medici simply called it good business. They had discovered that debt wasn't just a claim on future wealth. It's long as everyone agreed to pretend it was. Consider the genius of this system. A traditional craftsman, say a goldsmith, could only create value by physically working with gold. His wealth was limited by the hours in his day and the gold in his vault. But the Medici could create value by writing promises. A promise to pay back 100 florins with interest became, in their hands, an asset worth 110 florins. They could sell this promise to someone else, use it as collateral for another loan, or package it with other promises to create new financial instruments. They were, in essence, the world's first debt manufacturers, producing wealth not from raw materials, but from human faith in future repayment. The Catholic Church, which had banned usury for centuries, watched this transformation with a mixture of horror and fascination. How could creating money from money not be a sin? The Medici solved this theological problem with semantic creativity. They weren't charging interest, they claimed, but rather a gift from grateful borrowers, or compensation for the risk of lending, or payment for the service of currency exchange. These weren't loans, but partnerships where profit just happened to be guaranteed for one partner. The church, deeply in debt itself and dependent on Medici financing for its wars and cathedrals, found these arguments surprisingly persuasive. This is perhaps history's first example of regulatory capture, a phenomenon we see repeated when Goldman Sachs alumni populate government treasuries or when banking lobbyists write financial legislation. As the Medici model spread across Europe, something profound happened to the nature of power itself. Kings who had once measured their might in armies and acres now found themselves subordinate to bankers. When Edward III of England defaulted on his loans from the Bardi and Peruzzi banks in 1345, he didn't just bankrupt to financial institutions. He demonstrated that even sovereign nations were now players in the debt game. Fast forward to 1694, when the Bank of England was founded explicitly to manage government debt. And you see the final transformation. Nations themselves became debt products, their entire economies serving as collateral for loans that could never be fully repaid. This is where the story becomes eerily modern. The Bank of England pioneered what we now call sovereign debt, but with a twist that would have made the Medici gasp in admiration. They convinced investors that government debt was the safest possible investment, not despite the fact that it would never be fully repaid, but because of it. A government that owes you money forever is a government that needs you forever. The debt became the foundation of the currency itself. Pound notes were literally promises to pay bearer on demand, backed not by gold, but by the government's promise to continue collecting taxes to service its eternal debt. Sound familiar? Every dollar in your wallet is essentially an IOU from the Federal Reserve, backed by the full faith and credit of a government that owes $28 trillion. The Dutch took this innovation even further. In Amsterdam's coffeehouses in the 1600s, merchants began trading not just debt itself, but bets on whether debts would be repaid. They created derivatives financial instruments whose value derived from underlying debts. They invented options, futures, swaps, instruments so complex that even the people trading them couldn't fully explain how they worked. This should sound familiar to the 2008 financial crisis was caused by mortgage-backed securities and collateralized debt obligations, which were essentially the same instruments the Dutch were trading 400 years ago, just with better marketing and worse regulation. But here's where the story takes its most insidious turn. Somewhere between Amsterdam and Wall Street, debt stopped being a tool for financing productive ventures and became the product itself. The Medici lent money so merchants could trade spices and silk. The Bank of England financed wars and infrastructure. But by the 20th century, the most profitable activity in finance was creating debt for its own sake. Consumer credit, which barely existed before 1920, became the engine of the entire economy. Banks discovered they could make more money lending $10,000 to 1,000 people at 18% interest than lending $10 million to a corporation at 3%. Think about your own life through this lens. Your mortgage isn't really about houses, it's about creating a 30-year stream of payments that can be packaged, sold, and leveraged into more debt. Your student loans aren't about education, about creating a generation of reliable debtors whose payments can be securitized and traded. Your credit card isn't about convenience. It's about manufacturing small or high interest debts that, in aggregate, generate more profit than funding governments or corporations. You haven't just borrowed money, you've become a node in a vast network of debt products. Your future income already claimed, packaged, and sold to investors you'll never meet. The genius of modern debt production is that it's made itself feel inevitable, even virtuous. Having debt demonstrates creditworthiness. Not having debt makes you suspicious, uncreditworthy, outside the system. Your credit scorer number that didn't exist before 1989 now determines not just whether you can borrow money, but whether you can rent an apartment, get a job, or even date successfully. The system has evolved from providing debt as a service to requiring debt as a membership fee for participation in modern life. This transformation accelerated after 1971, when Nixon ended the gold standard and money became pure fiat backed by nothing but collective agreement. Without the constraint of physical gold, debt creation became literally limitless. Central banks could now create money by buying government debt. Governments could issue unlimited debt knowing central banks would buy it, and commercial banks could create money by issuing loans that became deposits that became the basis for more loans. It's the Medici system taken to its logical extreme. Wealth created not from gold or goods or even promises, but from the promise of promises. Infinitely recursive, a hall of mirrors where every reflection creates another loan. The 2008 crisis revealed the fundamental absurdity of this system. Banks had created so many layers of debt products that nobody knew who actually owed what to whom. Mortgage-backed securities were packed into collateralized debt obligations, which were packed into synthetic CDOs, which were insured by credit default swaps, which were themselves traded as products. When the music stopped, we discovered that the entire global economy was essentially a massive pyramid of iOS, with actual value buried somewhere far beneath layers of derivative debt. The solution: create more debt. Quantitative easing, zero interest rates, corporate bond purchases. Every remedy involved creating new debt to paper over problems caused by too much debt. And now we arrive at our present moment, where negative interest rates mean some borrowers are paid to take loans, where corporations borrow money, not to invest, but to buy back their own stocks, where governments solve every crisis by printing money that is itself debt. The Medici would recognize the game, but marvel at its scale. Debt has become not just a product, but the product, the fundamental commodity of human civilization. Global debt now exceeds $300 trillion, roughly 3.5 times the entire world's annual economic output. This isn't money that exists. It's money that's owed, wealth that's been claimed from the future and spent in the present. But here's the darkest truth, the one that brings us full circle to your mortgage, your credit cards, your student loans. This system doesn't just profit from debt, it requires it. Without continuous debt creation, the money supply would contract, the economy would collapse, the entire edifice would crumble. Every dollar in circulation is someone's debt. Every asset on every balance sheet is someone else's liability. The house you slowly paying off is unjust your American dream. It's a crucial input in a vast machine that turns human promises into tradable products. You feel trapped by debt because you are trapped, but not in the way you think. You're not just trapped by your own debts, but by everyone's debts, by a system that has made debt creation synonymous with economic growth, that has convinced us that borrowing from the future is the only way to pay for the present. The Medici discovered that debt could be manufactured like any other product. Their successors discovered it could be manufactured infinitely. And we've discovered, perhaps too late, that when everything is debt, nothing is actually owned. Not your house, not your car, not even your future. It all belongs to the machine that turns promises into products, that creates wealth from nothing and demands everything in return. This is the ultimate irony of our age. We live in the wealthiest period in human history, surrounded by abundance that would have seemed magical to Giovanni de Medici. Yet most of us will spend our entire lives servicing debts, paying interest on money that was created from nothing. Trapped in a system that profits from our promises. Debt hasn't just become the most profitable product in history, it has become history itself. The force that shapes our choices, defines our possibilities, and claims our futures before we've even lived them. The question isn't whether you can escape this system. You can't. None of us can. The question is whether you can see it clearly enough to navigate it, to use debt rather than be used by it, to understand that in a world where everything is a financial product, the most valuable asset might be the clarity to see the game for what it is. The greatest wealth transfer mechanism ever created, disguised as the natural order of things.